Hey everybody, welcome back to the One Whole Life Media Podcast. My name is Sean Francis, and here we're just trying to solve mental health. Super simple problem, or at least take tools from the experts and provide a platform for them to share their information and wisdom with you. This week is really cool. When I got out of the mental health institution in 2012, I just remember thinking, how have I not heard about any of these tools I've learned? How have I not learned to challenge my thoughts? How have I not learned about thought records? How have I not learned about mindfulness or meditation? Because it helped me so quickly. It seemed insane that it took a mental breakdown to learn about these things. And I kept wondering, what would my life have looked like if I had these sooner in life? And why aren't there people teaching these to kids sooner? And so, thanks to Shauna Schmidt, she helped me answer this question by connecting me with Jason Gruhl, who is literally writing children's books explaining these things, these concepts to children. He wrote a book called Everything is Connected, another one called Our Animal Neighbors, and my personal favorite, Just a Thought, which is the most powerful tool that I have had to help with my depression and anxiety issues, is to have thoughts and just to help kids the way it needs to anymore. And we talked about holes in the educational system, about why aren't they teaching you how to create and hold friendships and create relationships, things like that. Like, it's a powerful life skill that it seems like everybody should have. So we talked about all sorts of crazy things, but I was pleasantly surprised, but I am just in awe. He has the brilliance to be able to convey these kinds of topics to kids and give them these tools earlier in life. So, without further ado, Jason Gruhl. Jason Gruhl believes that all kids are smart, brave, kind, and creative, and he writes books to help them remember that. As an author and a psychotherapist for children and adults, Jason is dedicated to making a difference in people's lives and to helping them realize their power and potential. Jason is a former special educator and a former executive director and founder of the Audacious School, a school for children with autism spectrum disorders and developmental disabilities in Boulder and Denver, Colorado. He holds a master's degree in counseling psychology. When not writing, Jason is addicted to scones, board games, reading, and watching sci-fi movies with his cattle dog, Kobe. For more on Jason, head over to www.jasongruhl.com. Everybody, Jason Gruhl. Confucius said we have two lives, and the second begins when we realize that we only have one. We're all given one whole life. And when we find and break the barriers that are preventing us from living fully, we have an audacious attempt to improve mental health. One Whole Life with Sean Francis. You said you're a therapist for adults and kids, right?
Yeah.
So, but like, you've written these awesome children's books. Like, they're
look at you.
Absolutely fantastic. So like, why children's books?
I was working with I'd been working with kids with autism for a long time, and had a school and all this stuff. And at the time, I met my then, I met a guy and we got married, and and then he was like, "Do you want to move to Mexico?" While I was working at this school. And I said, "Yeah, I would love to move to Mexico, but I actually run a school, and my life looks different than that." And in that, a few minutes later, I was like, that's actually possible. And when I moved, and so 6 months later, I moved to Mexico. I hadn't even thought about really what I would do. And when I got down there, I was like, what am I going to do? And so I declared myself a children's author. And where it came from was, I think I was kind of having an existential crisis around, if I'm not the autism guy, if I'm not doing this, running this school and doing these things, like, who am I? And the first things that came back to me were things that I loved as a kid and things that I loved when I was in college, and thinking, what am I going to do with my life? Foreign languages and music and writing and all this stuff. And it was really cool to see this come back in this way and be like, wow, I want to write, and I want to write for kids. And I think most of my adult life has been about kids in some way, whether it's kids with autism or counseling or just that focus. So then having writing be about kids really made sense for me too.
I'm completely interested only because I feel like I have this weird connection with kids too, where almost like animals in a way too, where they're completely unfiltered. They say exactly what they think, and there's no conditioning yet or anything like that. And to me, I love that. Like it's one of my favorite things. And why I wanted to talk to you like so much was because I remember like being in a mental health hospital in my mid-20s and thinking, if I just had these tools sooner, like my life would look completely different. And like just a thought is literally, I came out with 2 shirts, and the first one was "Don't believe everything you think," and like it's exactly what this book is about. You know?
I love what you're saying about kids being just so essentially like blatantly who they are. And same with the animals. I'm always like, is it okay to compare kids and animals? But there is so much organic isness. You know, they just are what they are in so many ways until we parents and everybody else kind of start to, you know, have their impact on them, etc. But there is this beautiful sense of interacting with the world as it is. And I think that is that's something that really attracted me to both entering the world of kids and trying to recapture that sort of for myself, and for when talking to other people around like that idea of being able to, so many of the different religions sort of have some kind of statement around like, to be able to really get to who you are, you have to think like a child, act like a child, not in childish ways, but in perceiving the world as something that you are a part of. Yeah. As opposed to the separateness that we continue to sort of layer on across time. I think the other thing I loved about children's books was that they seem simple. I call myself a writer, but I don't fancy myself to write like some fat novel of some kind, or whatever. So I thought, kids' books will be more manageable. And I knew that wasn't the case when I started, but like, because so much more goes into the words, and like every sentence has to sort of do 1,000 things. Yeah. But it's a lot easier to manage 32 pages in a picture book than it is to 300 pages in a novel or something like that. So
when you were writing these, did you write it out first and then have someone illustrate on top of it? Is that was your process for that?
Yeah, I'll typically write the text, and then I realized that I'm a little bit of a control freak. So I actually maybe a lot of picture book authors have it in their heads of what the illustrations look like in their minds. Yeah. So I will actually oftentimes I might even sketch out the book how I see it. But I don't think I'm a good enough illustrator yet to do that for myself. And then I'll write the text that goes with it. And then I turn it over to an illustrator who ends up always making it 10 times better than what I ever could have imagined, which is like the beauty of collaboration, all the time. But
so for that process, how did you pick the first 3? Like you have just a thought, everything is connected in our animal neighbor. When you were, and if I'm projecting, just stop me. But is it like these common themes you were seeing, like when you were working with people, and you're like, if people have these early enough, or I won't say most important, but kind of the big ones you wish people just had early. Is that kind of how you approach it?
Yeah, no, I think you're hitting on it. What I sort of not joke about this with people is that I mine kind of my own neuroses, and I mine my own struggles that I've had across my lifetime for books. But I also have the blessing of being a counselor, a therapist, where I hear a lot of what people struggle with. And so it's exactly like these themes of feeling separate, not understanding that, when we pull on one thing, it's connected to everything else. And unless you are sort of viewing the world from that context, you can get isolated on a particular idea or a concept and not of course it doesn't make sense because it doesn't have a context of sort of everything else that goes with it. And of course you take yourself far too seriously because you're like, oh my God, I'm this thing. And it's true that you're both simultaneously like the most amazing miracle on the planet. And you're also like, no big deal.
Right.
and so I think it was these kinds of things. And then Just a Thought was the idea of, we just, you get this really well, like that we're not our thoughts, and that thought derail us. We're something that's so much more than that. So it was this idea that if kids could at least hear this earlier, like if someone had told me, hey, your thoughts aren't you when I was 8, I would have been like, what? Oh, that's an option to know that? Or
I was like that in my mid-20s, like, wait, I don't have to believe that? What? Just because I have it? Yeah.
I was in my 40s. Yeah. It's getting better. But yeah.
So how did you get there? Like, were you learning mindfulness practices or something like that while you were, in school, or did you find this later in life, or like?
I think it was, in college, I sort of, I had I know a lot of people don't have a really great relationship with religion. And I was raised in Minnesota in a really sweet kind of Lutheran thing where it was really about being nice to each other, community potlucks. Like it wasn't really dogmatic, and there wasn't a lot of like guilt and brimstone and all this stuff. So I actually had a really beautiful experience with spirituality from an early age.
Okay.
But I also, as I continued to grow and know myself a little bit more, and I think in college, I was like, wow, this is just one view. Yeah. And so where else can I look to sort of see what is this thing called being a human as I head out into this very scary and weird adult life. And so Buddhism was one of the things that I really dove into. And it was, I think I dove into is actually an overstatement. I read on it and I was like, that's really cool. I probably bought a stone Buddha and had some calligraphy in my apartment.
Yeah.
Or something. But it continued to sort of be something that I came back to over and over again as something I wanted to know more about. And then in my late 30s, I started really getting into meditation. And meditation was where it was so hard at first because it was just me and all of this and everything I thought I knew about meditation, et cetera. And then I started to become involved in communities where people were doing things. And I think the beautiful thing was I looked outside of myself for the answer in community and in teachers and in other people who had something to offer, so that I could then discover for myself what was it that I, in particular, as Jason Gruhl, was sort of dealing with in terms of shame or guilt or leftover things from being a kid or whatever it was, to start sifting that out. So I think that's where it started. And then across my lifetime, and then now I'm in my early 50s, and I have in my 40s, we're big diving into meditation, deep meditation. And I think for the past probably 7 or 8 years, it's my only question. It's sort of like, what is it to be human? What is it to be me in this world? What is it to be a human being specifically? And that's why the children's writing, I think, comes in really beautifully right now, because it's a really cool question to be asking and to be going through. And then to sort of say, I want to speed that up for that 8-year-old, or I want to give it a gift of this so that you can kind of dig in faster.
Yeah. The cool part was I went and looked at your questions and answers kind of thing, or most popular questions. And the one that struck me was, this is really complex stuff. How is a kid going to understand this? And I think your answer, correct me if I'm wrong, where you were like, kids understand this better because their minds aren't in a box yet. Like they have this imagination. They're able to grasp these concepts, which is beautiful to me in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's true. We often, one of the things that people have said to me, which I feel I'm always happy when people say it, is that I have a lot of respect for kids, and
Yeah.
I meet kids sort of in a place of, you're a little human on this planet. You don't have the years I might have, but your experience has already begun. And I'm going to engage with you as a human to human, caring that your life turns out a particular way, and in a free way, that you get to decide for yourself how your life goes. And I think their ability to kind of hear things like this and go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense, versus a 40-year-old or a 30-year-old who's like, what? No, there's so much unlearning to do before we can head forward, where a kid just is kind of like, oh, got it. Yeah. Is that it? Do I keep going?
Right.
Yeah.
Are they going through like similar things that you deal with adults? Like I was put in therapy like when I was a young kid, like 8, 9, 10, kind of an idea. And I don't know if you know a lot about my history, but lithium poisoning, over prescribed wrong. And that created all just sorts of mistrust with the system in a way. Yeah. It's been kind of wild. Yeah. So, my experience was different, but like, are kids coming in with like, how do you approach a kid versus an adult? Is there a lot of unlearning process, or is it more like, no, let's just put them on the right road and then you don't have to, unlearn anything?
Yeah. I think, this is sort of a duh statement, but like honesty is such a, honesty is sort of I think the building block of like every relationship. Yeah. And helping people start to trust themselves, and helping people trust you and trust the world around them. And I think for kids that I'm seeing right now, I'm pretty honest about like, hey, here's what's going on in your life right now.
Yeah.
From the perspective of, first of all, I guess a lot of them are coming in right now, or their parents sort of will suggest they come in because of anxiety and depression, and or deep sadness, or existential kind of like, I don't get this whole thing.
Yeah, and that was me.
And I'm like, yeah. And in particular right now, like the kind of like 13 to 19-year-olds, like this is a very different kind of human than we've seen, I think, on the planet before. I think there have been a number of generations that it's like a similar human under different circumstances. And I really feel like it's a different kind of human that's coming out right now with technology and science, or like technology and all of this stuff present from the second you're born.
Yeah, just the internet in general. Yeah.
Yeah, this access to knowledge, this access to being able to educate yourself, not necessarily, and sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways, but like a good and bad, like effective or ineffective ways. But so a lot of it is really like, so why I say it's a different human is they're coming in and not understanding why the world is struggling in the particular way it's struggling, and why they are sort of like reaping the horrible, the fumes from our bad Chevy, we're pumping out to them.
Right.
And they're like, it doesn't make sense. And in adolescence, it's tricky enough sort of as it is. But then to sort of be in this, the world is in a really crazy transition, especially the West and the United States, in kind of, it's in many ways, it's sort of like the end or a massive shifting of empire. It is a shift from like ways that we have energy. It's a way of shifting of how all of our information and knowledge gets passed. Our education system is like in many ways completely irrelevant, and in lots of ways shifting and it is a wacko time to be going through life. And so they come in and I'm like, oh my God, let me start by saying, there is no way, no reason you wouldn't be feeling completely wacko right now.
Yeah.
And we paint a little bit of the setting for them, and then also sort of go into, I have news for you. Your parents like have little clue what they're doing. Like they are trying the best they can based on the stuff that they're figuring out. But I said, they're still figuring it out. And I think, most kids sort of see their parents as like, you have it nailed. And if you have it nailed, any problem that's happening must be me. Okay. And there's a lot of anxiety and ennui that comes from that feeling of like, well, it has to all be me. So I think first up front, being a little honest around like, this is what happens generationally and what the parent-child relationship does and where your role is in it. And then from that, trying to help kids start to put together kind of with these books but more being able to like go inward and start to trust themselves, that they are the foundation, that, looking in some way to help them build that. While recognizing that how they're feeling isn't their fault, that there are very specific things that contribute to why we get into this place.
Yeah. But besides the trust, which, I mean, just listening to you say that makes me go, oh, makes feel like we're all at the tip of this arrow, it's like no one really knows what we're doing. We're just trying to do the best we can. That's kind of the sense I'm getting. And then you kind of go, well, if nobody knows what's going on, we're on the same page and we're all on the same playing field. So, all right, let's see what we can do as a team, right? Kind of an idea.
Yeah.
So what kind of tools do you give these kids to help, or their parents? What do you tell their parents? Kind of the same thing, or do you have anything where you like limit social media? I've heard a lot of social media kind of being bad for your brain and not seeing a realistic view of the world. But then I've also heard the other side where the future is technology, so embrace it and let's learn it now so we can master it as we go. So like, right. What side do you take, or do you have a combination of both?
I fall more on the, again, this is another one of those, like, this is a new human. And I think like people my age and older, or maybe even 40s and up or whatever, are like that had a totally different childhood experience. Yeah. Like I have to sort of for the sake of really being present for a kid who's 14 or something like that, I have to take myself out of my own experience. I mean, this is what any good therapist does, like be able to put yourself in that individual's experience. And when I put myself in that individual's experience, what I see is that technology is not going away. No. Me being like, you need to be on a half hour and then go for a hike.
Right.
And then like, prescribing something. I think the realistic and sort of trusting thing on my part is to say, I actually trust that kid is going to be embedded in technology. It's going to infiltrate every area of their life. And from within that, I think that individual will start to say, isn't there something more? I can extract this from this. I can extract this from this, but I think that there will be a turning point of them looking out to nature, or them looking out to these different things. I think I had a session yesterday and they were like really, really down. And I the first thing I said was, what are you eating? What's your diet like? And I said, let's look at that. And then I was like, okay, great. What is your exercise and sort of fitness looking like? And I was like, okay, you need to be walking more. You need to be getting out more and doing these things. What is your social life like? And like, okay, we want to work on creating some more friendships and doing these things. And then after we sort of hit these core things that like, this is the stuff of setting up your physical form and brain to just to even start to approach life, beyond that. Then we can kind of get into like, all right, where is the obstacle? Where is the thing that's preventing you from feeling as free and beautiful and spacious as you organically always are? Yeah. I think that's the thing, is sort of like, we can get into a space that feels so dark and it can go on for so long that it can just, it's assumed that that's normal and that is permanent. Right. And I think it's trying to like break up rigidity It's trying to like label obstacles so that we actually have something that we can work with and be with and do something with and not feel stuck. I think stuckness is the thing. COVID is like, the stuckness is sort of the thing we all have caught because of COVID. In many ways. But
and again, correct me if I hate to try and put words in your mouth, but it seems like that the main point is just like self-awareness, right? Like what things are making me feel this way, what things are making me feel this way, what are my thoughts doing, like just paying attention to like your mind and your body, and then maybe making different choices after that. Is that kind of where you start? Because I keep going like everybody's different, right? Like some people, like my job is social media now, right? Where it's done some really great things for me, where someone else, it might create an eating disorder or something like that. So how do you? So is that kind of how you start? Is like I know you just explained how you start, but is that awareness kind of that first piece? It's like, hey, let's try and bring some stuff to what's going on internally. Yeah.
I think it's important that all of us as humans know that we, like to quote, who was it? Anyway, whoever said, we're the ones we're looking for, like it starts with you. Like you actually are the one with the path out. So much of the suffering comes from constantly looking outwards for the answer and looking at other people's perceptions and other people's validation and we were taught this, that there's no reason we wouldn't do this, because as a kid, we love the hell out of ourselves. And then all of a sudden we learn, oh shoot, I have to sort of be a particular way to be loved, or I need to look a particular way, or I need to do this stuff. And it starts there and it never ends.
Isn't that kind of funny? Like we start there, we go through this process, and it's like, how do we get back there? But right.
It's bizarre.
It's silly.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
This is the kid piece again.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have to go through that piece of, breaking it to almost like appreciate it, or is that not necessarily? Yeah.
And it's one of the things I talk about with kids in therapy, is just sort of like, hey, you came into the world like loving life and not self-conscious and like just thinking that you rocked. And I'm here to tell you, you weren't wrong. And you've rocked this whole time, but some things have covered that up. And I think to your other question too, like helping people feel like they have the tools to begin to get themselves back to that place of freedom and back to that place of feeling at home in their body, and feeling like they have facility and ownership of like their experience in this world, and that the world is really just an extension of them and of all these things. That is what I'm trying to get people to. And I think sometimes when we're in that place where it's gone on a long time, or where there's been significant trauma, or where there's been something that like keeps us from, it isn't as simple as being like, oh, just meditate and get to know yourself. It might be really sitting with it for a long time and just sort of listening to the person and being with that person in that pain or in that suffering, and acknowledging that. Sometimes it's wading through things. I've seen some clients for years, and then like 2 years and a month in, they're like, "Oh, do you mean it's this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's what I mean.
We've been saying that for 2 years.
Saying that for this long." And another, some kid will, I'll talk to some kid. Kids have trauma too, and it can take them a long time. But some kid I'll say it, and they're like, the next week they're like, "Oh yeah, I tried that thing you were saying. That's really amazing." They just right into it. So the experiences are different for everyone, and I don't pretend that it's easy or quick, or that we all. I think that's the beauty of sort of counselors or spiritual guides or coaches or dear friends or whatever it is that can help you sort of see outside of yourself and shake up whatever image or view you have of yourself.
Yeah.
To find these pockets.
I love that. Yeah. I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn here, because I've had this question for a while. But so most of my life, I've been told I have a chemical imbalance, right? And then what I've from doing these first few podcasts, I've kind of like realized that I don't know if that's really the case. Is from your experience, is depression just a symptom of something that's going on? That's kind of how it's sort of been explained to me. Like you can't see it you can see the impact of depression on your brain, but you can't like find it, or a thyroid might cause these symptoms, but like you can't pinpoint it like a lot of other diseases. Am I on track there?
I mean, I can only speak from my experience with people that I've been with and friends and family and people in my life that have depression or
sorry, that's kind of a hard question.
No. So I don't speak for anyone with depression. I think that it's in some ways some people maybe do have like a propensity or have like something that, whether either chemically or things like predispose them to like slipping into depression or being in a depressive state, maybe easier than others. Or there's been some significant trauma or something that has triggered that and that's there. I think in most cases, like I said, circumstances build, and they maybe build very early, or something happens very early that sort of takes this sense of being at home in the world, and that I have that I'm okay, that I'm enough, that I'm valid, and I'm worthy, like whatever the flavor of that is, and that I have an easy back and forth with life. Something happens to sort of like have an individual go inward, and that is often accompanied by a deep sadness and a deep separation from feeling whole and from feeling connected to the world. And so of course this would be the natural consequence of that separation and of that experience of oneself in relationship to others and to the world. And so
so to fix, I don't want to say fix depression, but like to heal from it, what you're saying is you work on the thing that's causing it, not necessarily. And I'm only asking because I've been told for 25 years that it's this way, and now all of a sudden, I'm reaching out to people like you, like experts in the mental health field, and then it's like, if it's just a symptom, and I've been trying to cure the symptoms my entire life, no wonder it hasn't gone away nearly as quick. So when I started focusing on thought patterns or the trauma or other things, like it's like relief started coming out of nowhere. And I know everybody's different, but this is just my experience. And I remember the very first time this happened was when I was in that mental health hospital in my mid-20s. And I was taking all these meds. They were trying to get medication right. And I had one of those like trauma release breakthroughs. I don't know how else to describe it. It felt like a knot came untied, and I was like on top of the world. Like all this weight came off me, and I was like, that's the antidepressant I want. I want more, more of those trauma release kind of things, And that's what kind of created this one whole life thing too, is like, have people just not been honest with me, or has the technology and the research just finally advanced to the point where we really know what's going on? Because I've talked to a lot of therapists, and a lot of them go, we don't know where a lot of this stuff comes from. We don't know the brain. The brain's as big of a mystery as the universe is. Trying to figure it out.
I think everybody is probably doing their best, given a lot of different things that pull Western culture in a lot of different directions. I think in the West, we like to we focus on diseases and symptoms and on all these different things. And I think one of the things that helps me is that I'm equally rooted sort of in science and in spirituality. And I think it's the blending of both of those things that really capture the experience of a whole human being and physicality, sort of our biology, like nutrients and exercise, that kind of thing. But in terms of like the mind and spirit playing together, like I think it depends. If you grow up in the West, it's going to depend on on where you feel most comfortable. I think so. For some people, when we talk about when we look at their depression, I will say, if it's helpful for you, we can go back and look at some of the trauma or some of the past experiences that may have contributed in some way to like perceptions and ways of being and things like that you have maybe just persisted and haven't been questioned along the way. Like that can be helpful. But if you don't want to do that, or if that doesn't feel helpful, we can also just start right in this moment and sort of say, what would life look like for you if it was, beautiful? And the interesting thing is that for a lot of people, so many things have been taken off the plate that we actually need permission and we need help reimagining what a big, free, beautiful life even looks like. So one of the things they might say, this is a beautiful life. And so we well, let's brainstorm further. What might that look like? And you're like, oh God, I didn't even realize, I thought this was incredible. And it was really not. Yeah. And so it's putting everything back on the table, and then just sort of saying, okay, great. So where are the obstacles to that life taking place? And then we literally sort of just take them apart one by one. And maybe that leads back to the past. Maybe it has nothing to do with the past. And it's just them I'm going to add this in my life and stop thinking this way. Great. Yeah. Then, so there isn't a set thing, but it's, I think, sort of having all of the options available and being able to sort of, you can't ever say for an individual what's going to move them forward, but hopefully what happens in with either case is either a complete spontaneous, releasing of whatever that obstacle was, and they're just able to move on, or a massaging and an untangling of that obstacle that was there so that it can be released. But the point is that the river of your life is meant to flow. And you came into the world flowing, and you'll go out of the world flowing. And it's just what in the world has been put in your river to sort of not let you just be whooshing and evolving and doing whatever the heck you want to do.
I love that. Every question we have, we go back to, I'm just trying to remind you that how awesome you are, and how infinite you are, and how powerful. I know it sounds so simple, but it's harder than you'd imagine.
It's harder than you imagine.
My spirituality started in science, actually, to the point where it's well, if the universe was the Big Bang, right, and the Big Bang happened, everything in existence plowed out at the Big Bang. That means I existed at the beginning of the Big Bang in some different form. And I've always used this analogy of Play-Doh, right? You can build a dog and a person, and then you can mash them all back together, and then it creates a bunch of other things. But it's all Play-Doh, right? And so that's where my initial spirituality came from. I grew up Catholic, and was the opposite experience you had, just oh, this is terrible. And then, so I was one of those angry atheists for a long time. And then science kind of got me back into it. And then I fell into the Buddhism thing, because it made more sense than anything else. It was just try this. If it works, great. And if it doesn't, that's okay. Just do. Yeah. So again, I'm just I'm happy that the consistency between everything you're doing, you're I know the path. This is where we're trying to get everyone back to. Here's 30, 40, 50, 100 different ways to get back there. And have you always done that with your practice, or did that kind of develop over time?
I think, like I said, I'm 51 right now, and life is a really hard place. Yeah. It is way harder than they tell you. And I don't think it's something that you could be told and believe it early. It's one of those things, that you have to sort of go through it and experience each of these things to sort of, to understand that statement. And I think it just continues to be, it's very hard and challenging, I think, the whole way through. And it is beautiful and joyful. And my dad passed away this past year.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
My mother, thank you. My mother passed away about 18 years ago. And so I'm sort of an orphan in terms of the parental on this planet right now. And I had COVID. What was the other thing? I got a divorce. And each one of these, it's been a rough like year and a half.
Yeah.
And so but each one of these things sort of you start to understand, like, I think teachings and the things you might know cognitively and are able to tell other clients what to do, even when you're not necessarily sure. I mean, that's a phenomenon of like being able to like know this is true, even if you haven't nailed it for yourself, you know? And I think, but through each of these experiences, it's an opportunity to really sort of go, whoa, okay, so who am I? And like, what is it that I really want in a relationship? And no regrets or shame around how it went, but like, who do I want to be as a human being, and what do I get from this? And having both your parents pass away, there's also this kind of, someone else said, you never really are truly your own being until both of your parents pass away. And I understand that in some way now, because it's very existentially like bizarre to, even if you don't have a great relationship with them. And I had a pretty good relationship with mine. They are these wheels that are sort of your training wheels, and that, one might fall off, but you're like, okay, I still got my dad. And then when the other goes off, you're like, how does that? So to your question, I think it makes these experiences sort of like make it a really good therapist. Was that the question?
It was like, have you always had that point of reference in your practice? And it's right. What it sounds like you're saying is that it's constantly developing over time, and you might have it conceptually. And is that what you're trying to say?
Conceptually, I think I have had a sense of what it's supposed to look like. But as I get older, and because life is hard, and because that's an opportunity to really, like, if you take it, I think a lot of us can just add each of those things to the pain bucket, or to the suffering bucket. And if you can actually sort of say, what were you expecting? Of course, your parents are going to die. You're going to die. There's going to be suffering. You're going to have, you aren't going to nail every relationship you do. Like, you need to be able to expect as many shit shows as there are beautiful things in life. And to see that, I think it's getting closer and closer to my life actually looking like the thing I hoped it would, that I've been seeing is possible. But it's because of these things too. This is, poets and scholars and people have said this way better and for thousands of years, but like, it's weird to sort of be living that and going, wow, I get how all of it, the good and the bad, come together to really create sort of a reality that syncs up with the experience that you're hoping for. And oftentimes our mind and our reality are so separate, right, that in itself becomes a really conflicted way of being in this world. So if that makes sense.
No, 100%. Like I hope this doesn't sound dark, but do you think it's important for people to like remember or realize that, or just be told that, hey, this isn't an infinite existence you're going to have in this reality, like spirituality, like maybe, like we don't really know, but like if we're using that Play-Doh analogy I had, you're just going to go back into Play-Doh and you might have a frog's leg atoms or molecules. But like that's kind of why I named it like this one whole life thing, is because I'm sure you've heard of this, but there was that nurse that talked to patients on their deathbed in Australia about the seven. There was there's 7 regrets, and it was so powerful to me to read that, because as someone who's been suicidal and been kind of close into that space, I almost see it now as a gift, because it made me go, I definitely don't want to do that. I don't want to sit in an office. I don't want to do that full time. I don't want to do and it helped me. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I just knew what I didn't want to do. And now it's like, it's very fulfilling for me, like talking to you and learning this type of stuff. And I don't think I would have had that gift unless I, had that reminder that this is an infinite, kind of a thing.
I think it's critical.
Yeah.
I think it's actually one of my daily meditations is meditating on my death.
Is it really?
Yeah. And sort of reminding myself that this all ends.
Yeah.
And that I'm a finite being, and I too have been suicidal, and sort of there's a hopefully if you get through that, and when you get through that, sort of having that reference point of being like, wow, that is a choice, that is something that and an option, and to sort of be like, to be with that a little bit and like, wow, okay, so what does that mean? What does that mean for me in my life?
Yeah.
And not to like Pollyanna it and be like, whoa, I need to go live my best life and blah, blah, blah. It's just a very real way of sort of going, that was really hard. And this is what life looks like sometimes. And I can move through that, and I have a better understanding of who I am and what I want. And I don't know, it's just sort of, I see us as like these big, beautiful, like gems, and experiences like that push you into the dark corners. And you sort of go, oh, I'm bigger than I thought over here. And you're pushed into this other thing. Here's my divorce. And then here's my parents dying. And here's this. And it begins over a lifetime. You begin to really get a sense of who and what you are. And you're thankful for those in some ways. It's a weird thing to say, but you can, at some point, you can kind of, once you move through that darkness, it can be a point of gratitude for sort of saying, thank you for helping me see my fullness. It's also a phenomenon, I think, mostly in Western culture too, that we're always happy, always like,
yeah.
And I sort of have tried to switch the word over for myself to like contentedness, which doesn't have sort of a happy or a sad piece to it, but it has a quiet contentedness with like letting sadness come in. And like, that's part of my experience, and letting happiness come in, as you know, like Buddhists sort of say, it's easy to not get attached to the bad things, but we don't want to get attached to the good things either, because it all sort of comes and goes. And can you be so okay with the phenomenon of life that you go with the sad when it comes, and you go with the happy when it comes, but then you come back to this place of like, I'm in life. Isn't it all there? Isn't this all it?
Yeah, that was actually the hardest part of. So I did a year of Zen meditation, and I
remember you saying
just down the rabbit hole, right? And that was one of the hardest things for me to even wrap my head around, was not to have attachment. And I did it in the sense where I was like, don't get attached to the happy things. But what I was doing, and I noticed that I just was limiting how happy I was in those moments too. I was like, no, and I just wasn't at all. And I realized months later that I can enjoy those moments fully, and I just don't have to hold on to them. And I was trying to just not, don't be happy. Almost the same way I was like, don't be sad, don't be depressed, don't be happy, don't be joyful. And that attachment piece was like, oh my God, I can enjoy this. Almost like I can eat this, whatever, if you like cake, I can eat this cake and then, enjoy it, and then it's gone, and then I can still enjoy it. I don't have to go buy another cake afterwards. Yeah. Which is,
we would go to Costco and be like, I must preserve this cake moment and have 20 cakes ready,
Right. Yeah, could you imagine? She has a fridge just full of cakes. I just like cake that much.
I'm sure there are people who do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, like, that experience is so impressive and powerful to me. And how did you, or like, are there ways that you like kind of keep yourself in that place of not making it conceptual, but having it be more lived for you? Where you're like, I can feel this happiness, I can feel this thing, and not have it be like, don't be happy, don't be sad.
Yeah, it's hard for me. Like from this whole project I'm doing, I think I've been told, or I got the message ever since I was a kid, that depression is bad. Don't be sad. Don't you know,
Mhm.
and it might, and I'm still exploring it. Did it come from my parents? Did it come from society? Did it come from therapists? Did it come from school?
Yeah.
You know, and maybe I was just a sensitive kid, and I'm don't have those answers yet, but that's why I keep
Yeah.
asking you these questions.
Yeah.
So trying to avoid sadness seems to be this pattern in me. And so as you were saying, leaning into the darkness now, like the other day, I forgot what show we were watching. Oh, we were watching The Office with my wife, right? And
Yeah.
not a show you usually cry at, but it was this episode Michael left, like the show. And and I just remember getting emotional over it because we loved that show, and you could just see Steve Carell just loved the cast and loved being there and everything. And then I immediately saw my thoughts going, don't cry, don't have this emotion, you know, kind of be tough. And I was able to just go, no, man, this is beautiful. Like, this guy has this tribe, this family he's been with, and he's leaving the show, and you can genuinely see this isn't fake that he's leaving. He's experiencing that. And then I like cried in front of my wife, and that's been really hard for me to do, you know? Yeah. Right. Yeah. But I let it happen. And then she was crying too, because I always joke that she has better emotional intelligence than I do. So like, we're both just crying, and she didn't judge me. And it was like this beautiful moment by letting myself be vulnerable there. And so when I seem to practice there, and then I've had this, like, I was trying to figure out the meaning of life, kind of like you are in a way. And I got to this point where it was just like, life's just meant to be experienced. And that was like the sentence that kind of defined this. All right, can I challenge that? Is there a way to challenge that? And I've been trying to challenge it for 10 years, and I haven't broken it yet. Cause, so I use that when I go, oh, this is one of those moments, and I can have awareness in the moment instead of try to save it, if that makes any sense. And then it allows me to experience it fully in the moment. And then when it's over, there's like gratitude that, oh, I just had that, instead of trying to hold on to it like I used to. And and so meditating every morning helps me with that. If I miss a day, then things don't go very well, but it helps create space between the experience and my thoughts, where I just have a moment or two, like very quick to grab it, I guess, or to sit in awareness. I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love the concept of like a daily practice.
Yeah.
Just because I work with a lot of kids, and so a messy room is sort of a good metaphor for them. And I say, you clean your room, and it doesn't just stay that way. Like the next day, there's a t-shirt on the ground, you left a cup over on the sink, and there's a thing. And I said, this is the nature of our minds. And this is the nature of our bodies as well. Like, why wouldn't we need to pay attention to this and to maintain it on a regular basis? Like, set aside time where we're really paying attention to, like, whoa, what's my mind like today? Sometimes it wakes up like a windy hurricane, and other times it's like just a smooth kind of whatever, but checking in with that and paying attention to that, and same for our bodies. And I think in the West, again, we sort of, we like extremes, and we like things to be like, we want to do what we want to do. And then if there's some way that'll get us to what we really know is going to be better, we would just want it easy, a pill or a strategy or a diet or something, instead of sort of paying attention to this idea that, like, no, I'm sorry to say, and happy to say, it's an ongoing process of always paying attention to yourself. And that ends up being the gift. That ends up being the path through which you navigate this world and understand what's in your way.
Yeah, I got that message through skydiving, actually, or in mountain biking. So I did all these crazy sports, right? And what I realized, what I liked most about them was they forced me to be in the moment. Like you can't think, you just have to react, or bad things are gonna. So mountain biking, you're gonna hit a tree. Skydiving, you're gonna forget to pull your chute or slam into somebody or something. And pole vault was like that for a long time too. And
Wow.
That's how like the Buddhism or I call it the year of Zen. That's how that kind of started for me. It was like, how do I get there without having to jump out of a plane? You know?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the trick. And it's been kind of wild because I can go to a 6-year-old's birthday party and it feels like I jumped out of a plane now. Like you can have that experience. And yeah, like how do you experience things like that at all too? Like I know you're a master meditator. We'll call you too.
Back off.
No, yeah, I know. I don't know if you ever figure it out. Like the longer you go, you're like, oh crap. But like, how do you see the nature of the mind? Like, do you like a big tweak in my brain was like, you're not your thoughts. You're what watches your thoughts, right? So. How do you see like what the mind is doing? Because it always feels like you're fighting it in some way, shape, or form, but it's got to be doing something good for you at the same time too, right?
Yeah. No, I think there's so many good people that write and talk about this. I think my first encounter with it was Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul.
That's a great book, yeah.
And where he talks about the roommate in your head and this and that. It was I was like, what? And then he literally wrote something like, at this point, your roommate has just said what? And I was like, oh my God, and it beginning to sort of untangle from your mind as yourself. And then there have been lots of things that have sort of like continued to do that. But I think that idea of, it's, I'm milking this jewel metaphor, but like like in a jewel, that book was one facet, and then maybe I did a retreat that was this facet, and the program that this was this facet. I don't know if any one thing could sort of break through. Maybe for some people, they read one thing and they're like, oh. Yeah. For me, that's not the case. I've had to sort of like hit it from a lot of different angles, and Buddhism has been the primary thing that I sort of have felt I've gotten the most from in terms of that. But all these things have begun to paint a picture of myself as this consciousness or this thing that is sort of like quiet and at rest and contented always.
Yeah.
And that I am in a human body and I have a human mind, and that these are really beautiful tools. And it's the difference from being seated in that place of on a great day. I am paying attention to this moment only. And there's no problem. I'm getting a tattoo soon that just says there is no problem.
Oh,
because
I like that.
That's one of the things where there is no problem. And there literally is just life, how you beautifully said it. We're just like, the goal is to experience that. And so from that place, I'm in my life. I'm like loving my dog next to me right now. I'm having a beautiful conversation with you. And this is where I am right now in this moment. And if I needed to, if you were like, hey, what was this memory or this thing? I go to my brain. Oh, that's right. I have a resource. Let me recall that. Yeah. And I go and I think about it and I'm like, oh yeah, it was this and this and this. Thanks, brain. I come back into my body and just sort of am like, I'm back in this sense of just being with you. Yeah. And I think that has been, it's a way of not sort of discounting anything. Like I remember I had a therapist once and I was like, do you know anywhere I can get a lobotomy? Because I hate my brain. Yeah. And they were beautiful. And I actually got this tattoo of it's a mongoose. I don't know if you could see it on my arm. And she said, no. She said, you got it all wrong. She was like, yes, the brain drives you crazy. She's like, but you have to be friends with it. It really is just trying to protect you. It oversteps time and time and time again. It's crazy that way. But it's a really amazing gift. Yeah. And I think, one of the beautiful, hopefully the things that we can do is in therapy and different things is to help people see all of it as part of the plan and part of the program. Yeah. Not program, maybe, but part of like how we live our lives, and to love all of it. Your crazy mixed up brain that thinks it needs to run your life and that you associate with way more than you should. this beautiful consciousness that you really are, and then this body that you have, and how do we take care of all of these things. But it gets simpler and simpler and simpler, I think, the more you dive into it. And yet we're addicted to the complicated pieces of it, and by real trauma and by real things that happen to us that take us off a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that I had to ask just because you've been down this road for way longer than I have, and I mean you're doing it right. Like you're getting kids to start early, like it's fascinating, but separating that is so powerful, and because when I started talking openly about my mental health in the past, I would get messages from people that said the same thing you did. Like, how do I turn it off? Why isn't it doing this? And you're like, I've tried to do that too. You can, but you can use the cloud analogy where their thoughts are flying through and you can watch them and they're like, I don't want to watch any clouds right now. Like they're in a state where they just want it to end, So if somebody's brain is that active, do you have any tips that you tell them in that moment where they can get some relief?
Something someone said to me once was, again, not mind-blowing, but it takes years and years and years to kind of create the mental storms that are going on in our heads. And for us to think that over a weekend retreat or something else, like the whole thing's going to just clear and you're going to have this amazingly, I understand the nature of being all of a sudden and all the time, and I never have a thought again. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
And so I think one of the things is to just be really gentle with yourself and to understand sort of like, I have, not often anymore, but I still have meditative sessions that are like, oh, what should I have for dinner tonight? Oh, I'll need to get those groceries. And oh my gosh, oh, did I forget to do that? Oh, and the whole, like a 30 minutes or an hour can be my mind going crazy.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is one of the powerful things about having a teacher or other people that you're meditating with or groups or whatever that is to not do this alone. I often was like, well, the Buddha did it alone. Or like, I'll think of a spiritual figure and be like, they did it alone. I'm going to do it alone. And we're not meant to do this alone. We're meant to sort of be in communion with each other and to sort of sit with each other and have an hour of complete horrifying meditation to yourself and then sit down the next day and do the same thing and sit down this next day and do the same thing. And over time, it goes away. You start to go, oh, that was that voice and this is the calm. And you're like, ah. And so it's sort of, if we can learn to sort of like love and accept where we are right now in that moment, I think that's one of the most powerful things in therapy as well, is to sort of show up with people exactly where they are. They don't have to change a thing. And you're like, let's just get curious about where you are and have an idea of where you'd love to be maybe. And then let's play with that. There's no rush. There's no whatever. Like the point is just knowing yourself and being able to love everything there is about that, even the dark spots and the things that haven't gone well. And we can, like you said, with Office, there's moments where we're just going to sob.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, that's what there is to do right now. And I'm just going to sob. And you're like, great.
Yeah.
And then there's moments where you're like, oh, I feel so free. You're like, oh, that's so great. And then the next day you're like, I feel like I lost everything. You're like, okay, it's okay.
Yeah.
Now what? And now what? And now what? It gets, I hate the word better, but like there's a clarity that can't help but find its way into that kind of life that keeps looking and keeps allowing, and not judging and blaming yourself for how it's going, but just being with what's actually there.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I got my master's in biomechanics and exercise physiology. And I get the sense that, people think Well, the same thing happens with the body. They want to go work out for 1 week and then think they're going to be jacked, and it takes time.
Right.
Yeah, and I think, and I don't know if it's just Western culture or not, but a lot of people I've run into, it seems it's a similar idea or mindset with the mind too. Like, I should go to therapy once and everything should be fixed.
Right. Right.
Or you take this magic pill and you can. Everything's gonna be great, and it's not ever how that works, And that's why, like, I appreciate having this conversation, because it's just so honest that it probably won't be better in one session, one day. That's very unlikely. And giving people realistic expectations, I think, is extremely helpful.
Yeah, and being, I think it's a very serious question to sort of say, do you really want to know what you are? You really want to know sort of how you operate. And a lot of people don't want to really know that.
Really? I think you run into that a lot?
Well, I see that a lot in the world. I think people who come to therapy are already in the conversation of, gotcha. I want to know more.
Yeah.
But in the world, you see a lot of people completely wanting to remain ignorant of what is actually going on with them. And they're usually the loudest people about what's wrong out here. Not to say there isn't a lot wrong, a lot that feels discordant in our world. Like, there are plenty of things to feel scared and anxious about, etc. And it begins with us, right? Yeah. Even in all of that, it begins with us. And I think there are tons of people not wanting to ask that question. So for me, when you get in pursuit of that question, like, what am I really? Or who am I really? And how do I work? That it begins an unraveling that if you stay in that question, you will get there. And it's going to be a rocky, crazy, horrifying, beautiful path. But that question, you have to be dedicated to that question. And I think that's a really beautiful way to live your life, in that question.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I think you're right. Do you think it's fear of facing your own death, or just your life's going to be completely different and not predictable anymore? Or you might see some part of yourself that you're like, oh, frick, I hate that in other people, and there it is in me, kind of.
I guess maybe yes to all of that.
Yeah, maybe. I was
depending on the person.
Yeah.
I think it's.
I guess, what are people afraid of? What is?
It's scary. It's scary taking responsibility. I think for people that their life looks how it looks because of them. My life is exactly what it looks like because of how I'm living my life and my views and not to say that people haven't helped me left and right. Of course it is that way. But for me, I'm meaning more sort of like my internal experience of my world. I think we love to have something else to blame. My mom died when I was 30. I didn't get the education I wanted, or whatever it happens to be there. And I don't, this is dicey water.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that trauma and different things don't impact our lives.
But that's uncomfortable to look at too, though. Right.
But it's uncomfortable to look at that. And it can be one of those things that you have to then unpack a little bit so that someone can sort of feel like they're back in the seat of their own power.
Okay.
But my point being is that we are always the seat of our own power in some way. It's also not, systemic racism, misogyny, all these different elements in our society that absolutely keep people down, all things being equal.
Yeah.
I'm talking more about sort of the internal experience of how we interact with life.
Okay.
We can often use all of these different things to suffer.
Yeah.
To suffer in ways that we don't have to be suffering.
Right.
And to realize that we have far more power in our lives over how we experience that life than we ever give ourselves credit for. Gotcha. Instead of letting that thing run us. There are so many other things running us most of the time that if we can get in contact with those things and sort of be with those, it gives us a different kind of power and a different way of experiencing life. I hope that comes across the right way.
No, totally.
And in a respectful way to sort of all of the elements that are real barriers to people living free lives in our world. Yeah. Absolutely acknowledging all of that. Yeah. And there's a responsibility that we have to take for how we are living our lives and interacting with those experiences that move us forward.
So it's kind of like I forgot who said this too, but it's like you have the power and the choice, right? To decide how you interact with whatever life gives to you and how you give back to it. Like you and I didn't create racism. It's there. It's not fun, but like how we respond to it, that's where our true power comes in. And is that kind of what you're saying?
That's a perfect example, especially as white men,
right?
As a white person, like one of the things, like I have to look at my own privilege. I have to look at the responsibility is on me.
Correct. Yes.
And if I make a conversation out here about all these other elements, the conversation is who am I going to be and how am I going to be different now that I know this?
Correct.
Like, what is my responsibility in this? And I think a lot of people, we get afraid of how much responsibility that we have for all of these different things. That's a very ominous idea. The fact that, oh, wow, I directly contribute to racism regularly.
Yeah.
in my privilege, in how I interact with people, in the things I don't say, and the things that I do. Mm-hmm. I am directly in it.
Yeah.
And I have something I have to do differently. And so that's been a conversation I've been in more recently in the past year and a half around that.
Oh, yeah, same.
And the list goes on.
Yeah.
So but it goes down to like the littlest things.
Yeah, it's your book, right? How you just keep shifting through them. Everything's connected, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Everything is connected, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I hate to shift gears on you, but I don't want to run out of time. No. I have to hear about how you got into creating the autism centers. Like I was blown. Like where did that come from, and how did you start that?
That like sort of randomly. I just come out of school at college, and I was working in Minneapolis. And I ran out of skills for what I was doing psychology. I was starting to work with adults with some mental illnesses, major mental illnesses. And I ran out of skills. So I came to Colorado to do a master's program in counseling psychology.
Okay.
And while I was doing that, I got a job at a home for adolescents that were struggling with behavioral issues. And I didn't like the politics of the organization there. And so I was looking for another job, and I applied in Denver public schools. And at the time, schools were going through a huge shortage of teachers, and they could give emergency teaching licenses to people who looked qualified or seemed like a good bet. I'm like, this seems like a crazy thing. But I applied for a paraprofessional job in one of these classes, so like a teaching assistant job. And when I walked in, they said, the teacher just quit. Do you want to teach this class? And I was like, can you do that? And they're like, yeah, we can do that. I was like, sure.
Wow.
That's more. This seems great. And it was a class of kids with autism and developmental disabilities, primarily autism. And so the beauty of that was, so I was getting a counseling psychology degree. I had to simultaneously enroll in a special education degree. So I was working on 2 master's degrees and teaching full time in a class of kids with autism.
Wow.
And but the beautiful thing about that was I didn't know, I hadn't had a lot of training in it. And so I was having to really sort of like go with my gut and go with what is the experience of this kid? You know, how are they experiencing the world, and how might I meet them in that place that's different. And I think not having the training beforehand ended up being this really beautiful access point, because I didn't come in sort of like, here's what my training tells me I should do about you. I actually just met that kid exactly where they were and was kind of like, I know nothing about this. Wow. And let's all get curious and sort of like figure this out together. So we started working together, and our program started getting some notoriety for doing some different things and for really making an impact for kids in ways where they were like, this kid will never speak, this kid will never do these things. And they started to move in these directions past what people expected.
Yeah.
And I ended up finishing that degree, and there were parts of the school that I was like, this is not relevant to real life, and parts of it that were really relevant and awesome, like a lot of programs. And then in about 9 years in, or 7 years in, one of our students passed away at home, and his name was Joshua. And I think there was his one med was going up and one med brought his blood pressure down. And I think he was a small little boy, and it inconclusive, but there was something happened where he couldn't be revived. And we came in the next day, and it was one of those moments where you don't quite know how to process something like that.
Yeah.
And we had been complaining about, if we ran our own school, we would do it this way. If we called the shots, we would do it this way. And in that moment, we said, you know what, if a kid has 9 years on this planet, they deserve better than what's happening in the public school systems right now.
Wow.
And we are going to quit bitching about this, and we're going to create the school that we think could maybe do something different.
Yeah.
And so we spent the next 2 years after school and on weekends planning curriculum, planning, bake sales and whatever you do to sort of have a nonprofit go into this thing. And 2 years later, we quit our jobs, cashed in our retirements, and started this school, hoping it would work.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So it was this wild kind of a catalyst and then trying to do something different. And then the rest kind of, another thing I'll say is that people heard we were doing this in Denver metro area. And I remember being at a conference, and one of the special ed directors came up to me and said, hey, can I have lunch with you? I would love to talk about your new school. And I was like, oh, sure. What a sweet invitation. Yeah. And I walked into this room, and I would say about 15 special ed directors from around the city, the district, all the different districts were there. And they were like, you will not get a single student from any of our districts. They said, this is your idea for this school is exclusionary. We are teaching in our schools, and we're doing just fine. You will never get one of our kids, and we just want you to know that. And I was like, wow. I was sweating and so sick to my stomach, and just like, wow, this is happening. And I somewhere found the courage to say, in your hearts that there is a kid, there are 2 kids, there are 20 kids that you are not serving, and that you are not doing what's possible. And I said, my request would be that you would give that kid a chance at our school, give 1 or 2 kids a chance at our school, and let's share information. Let's figure this out together. And I said, that's my request to you. And they stood up and they walked out, and they said, not a kid.
Wow.
And over the 10 years that I ran that school, every single school district had put a kid at that school. And I think it was because we never said anything bad about the public schools.
Yeah.
I think, those are systems that sort of work within the constraints that they're put in. And they are huge bureaucratic machines that just are not able to actually meet kids where they're at a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But they saw what we were doing, and they saw that we were having results in the same way that we did before, looking at the kid as perfect when they came in. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know how much time we have left, but
no, I mean, we can keep going if you want to, but I want to be respectful of your time. So
yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay. My next book is called it's in the works to find a publisher here, but it's called It's All Made Up. And it's this idea that when kids would come into our school, that they came in exactly how they were supposed to. There was nothing wrong. And this is really true of any of us. The only reason anything we do sort of seems wrong is when you compare it to an expectation of what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, is that Mark Twain, right?
Yeah.
Expectations are the death of joy. Isn't that what he says?
Yeah. Yes, I love that saying. And so if you view a kid that way, that there is no problem. As they come in, there's simply a kid that comes in, and we get to have a conversation around like, what does life look like that looks really beautiful for you? What would a beautiful life look like for this kid, for their family, etc.? And you start there, and then you start looking at all the weird things our world does, and it expects of us. Stopping at red octagons with white squiggles, shaking our hands when we're greeting someone as we go by. Freaky, weird things that make no sense that we all just wake up every day and agree to over and over again. Anyway, it was a very human and a very kind, a very science-driven and data-driven. It was a combination of really, of thoughtfulness that went into that school that I think when you approach things from that place, they become unmessable with in some way, because the results of that are not about illusion.
Right.
And they're not about, and they're about real people.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I think I went off.
No,
on that question.
I would. You pulled me in. Like, it's funny because I have a family member. I think I talked to you in an email a little bit about this, but this friend is struggling to get her daughter diagnosed with autism. Like, she's been stimming since she was a kid, and we didn't know what it was. We thought she had breathing issues, and then later we find out that, oh, she's stimming. And then, you try to stop it because you're like, it must be hurting her. And then you find out, I had a friend who has autism, and she's like, no, stimming is a beautiful thing. Let her do it. Don't ever stop someone from stimming. It's their experience. And it was like, oh, wow. So then, when we ask that question, now we ask her, we go, what does that feel like? She's like, oh, it's this like tickle. It feels really good. We're like, why would we want to stop a tickle? That's how she describes it. But we didn't know right off the bat because she's higher on the spectrum. So she, like, everything else is normal, but she stims, and she's showing some other qualities. But she was worried about putting her into school because she's like, well, if we put her into school, she might be put on this, special needs program right off the bat and then be behind the rest of her life. So my friend's struggling to try and figure out, how do we navigate that? And it sounds like it was some of the issues you were dealing with when you were in there too. Like, maybe the school system's not the best place for somebody like that. But on the other side, you want to give her the help she needs at the same time. So I know it doesn't help my situation or my friend's situation, but it sounds like you created a place that solved all of that, which is beautiful. Or most of it. I worry about grandeur as too much. Same too. But it sounds like a great place.
It is.
Yeah.
It's an amazing place, and I think that testimonials that kind of come out of that school sort of speak to having high expectations for kids and like meeting kids where they're at, etc. I think in a situation like that, this is a little bit of a too big of a conversation for our setting right now, but like it speaks to the educational system in some way. And like the need for kind of an overhaul of what it really means to set a human up for a human life. Right. And what exactly do we need to, if we have kids from when they're 4 or 5 up to 18, like, what is it really that, like, as humans we need to kind of navigate this world? And I think it's very, very different from what we give kids. And so being able to meet them where they are, one of my favorite expressions that came from it was fair doesn't mean equal. fair means people getting what they need. And so I think to be fair to people is, a school system would need to be a lot more nimble than it is, and being able to sort of say, these are the impacts that are playing on different people, and how do we help accommodate for those things? And then what are these ways that we help set them up for a beautiful life that they get to step into and decide for themselves? I wish that school system existed for this child that you're talking about, because right now there isn't a great, I don't think private schools necessarily, or even sort of independent schools that maybe have fewer kids or fewer opportunities for social stuff or different things like that, they don't always nail it either. And I don't think a public school is maybe being personal or tailored enough to nail a lot of the things there. And so it will often be a conglomeration of things.
It's almost like you need a college, right? Or they go to and they learn this skill in this building, and this skill in this or something similar. Because I got my undergrad education, and through my student teaching, I was like, I'm out. That was my experience. Was how political it was, and like I wanted to make an impact in kids' lives, and I was like, there's got to be. I think I can do this outside of this box they're trying to put us in. And so I can 100% relate to everything you're saying here. And I mean, we can, like you said, we can go down the rabbit hole on how like the school system taught people how to be on assembly lines, and it hasn't really updated since then. Right.
Yeah. Right.
And now I've had this conversation with my niece, cause she's like, how do I be a vlogger, or how do I create videos for people? And like, where do I learn that? And I was like, I'll teach you, because I had to figure it out myself. But like, school makes it hard to be an entrepreneur or something like that too, And as you're saying, we're in a world where with the internet at disposal, everyone can essentially create anything that their mind can come up with now. Yeah.
And I have to say, there are incredible teachers that are doing some of the things we're talking about, that are, it's sort of microcosms of this incredible new vision that isn't in the larger manifestation of that yet. But like I have a couple kids right now who are like, I want to just do homeschool with the internet because I feel like it's more relevant to me and my life and my interests.
Yeah.
If I had some system that would help me do this, and you're like, okay, well, but the social piece or this piece, but in some ways I run up against those arguments. I'm like, I don't have a good argument.
Right.
I actually think you're right. And, and so like, where is this new paradigm that will kind of recognize what we're heading into, and that there is no chance we are not heading into the technological world that we all sort of fear / are enchanted by.
Yeah.
It is where we are going. And so how do you,
But that's why I love what you're doing though, is because you're giving the kids, I don't want to say belief, because belief sounds something you learn, but the awareness that they have the power to create that, even if it doesn't exist yet. And that's sort of what happened to me, where I was like, I got a master's degree that I'm not using. Well, I'm kind of using it. I mean, I always use it. Everything's connected, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not using it in the traditional sense. And it's, I think I just created a career for myself. And I think a lot of kids are at that place now where I have Etsy, or I have Amazon, or I have all these other things they can tie into, or just make something. But the part that I keep thinking about is that social part, whether kids think it's important or not. Like I personally do. I consider myself like an introvert to the most part. But man, I did like going to college and in high school and seeing those same friends in every class. And then when that ended, it was kind of like, how do you be an adult? Where do you find your tribe now? Which is a whole different conversation.
Yeah. And I think, that one of the to bring it back to the Joshua School a little bit, why don't we talk more about how friends are created?
Yeah.
Or where we find these things as we go through life, or the importance of community, or studying sort of like how community across as you age like means something, to the elderly or to the youth or to like different things like that. Maybe it's touched on momentarily in a sociology class in 11th grade, but it's not like a core part of, and this is a core part of our lives.
Yeah, but instead we're learning about Anne Frank.
Looking for friendship and connection and authenticity with people and conversations that mean something. And my God, like, put me out of a job because that's going so good. I would love that, know. But we don't teach people about some of these core things. The other, I can look up the capital of Maine on the internet if I need it. I don't need to memorize that. Great. We just saved this amount of time. I don't need to learn about this piece. Like, I think there are things that we can begin to sort of like put ourselves in the shoes of someone else to sort of say, what is really important? And or teaching kids how to access it. We don't quit asking questions because we're not like told to do it in school. We're human beings. This is what we do. We ask questions. We go out into the world. And anyway.
No, you're right. It's like, but by sparking these questions, and if kids have access to the internet, maybe that'd be a way for them to self-educate in a way too, which.
Yeah.
The connection pieces, we'd have to do a whole nother podcast because that's something I don't think people talk about nearly enough, is just whether it's connection with themselves or others or, just life in general. It seems like there's a lot of disconnect that you see a lot, which is causing a lot of pain for people. But,
that I think that is, there's something that's sort of similar between generations. I think like, anytime a new generation is coming along and new things are coming in, there is this, the blessing of our era is always the curse of the era in some way too. And so it's like, how does it play out over time? And I think one thing we are seeing because of internet and, video games and different things like that is there is so much more internal or time inside and time by ourselves and isolation. And then COVID just made it like hooked on steroids times 20. And yet people are finding community within that, whether on like Discord or, these different places where kids and adults, anyone can kind of like connect in that way. Sometimes that's a really beautiful thing. It's places where kids that weren't connecting at all are now actually playing in the world of communication and playing in the world of like saying the wrong thing and having to mend that and doing different things. That's actually a really beautiful thing. Yeah. I think sometimes if that's where it ends and they're wanting something deeper and more connected, there's the hindrance on that piece. So we have to be careful not to demonize, there's the ones that are like, oh, video games are killing our youth. It isn't that simple. Everything is always sort of like this flip side. And it's really being able to find the balance and find what a human life looks good.
It's like, it's the gray, right? Like it seems it's easy to polarize technology, right? But I've tried to talk to like my parents about this, and it's like, well, a knife isn't bad. The kid could use it in a bad way. It's a tool, so you just gotta teach the kid how to use the tool. They could murder a cat or build a house or make a birdhouse out of it or something. Man, we're at 90. Can I ask you like one more question, if that's right? So with this autism school, did you have ranges from like severely autistic to people on like higher up on the spectrum, or how did you navigate that and have like classrooms with that?
Yeah. So this motto was really, and we had kids from actually, I think 2.5. So it was a preschool through 21.
Really? Okay.
And then we had kids that were, who had some pretty significant, autism, and up to kids that were, with Asperger's syndrome or, just had that symptoms that were sort of less intense than that for sure. So a wide range of kids that came in, and, our classrooms were never bigger than 4 to 6 kids.
Wow.
And so that was sort of, it isn't, I'm not sure if it's a scalable or sustainable, something that could be done, like, but not every kid needs that. Again, it's back to that fair as kids getting what they need. I think when there are kids that require an environment and systems that are really structured and staff intense, to be able to kind of bridge something, it's, for most of those kids, that level of intensity isn't required for the entire time they're in school from 5 to 18, but it's required to sort of help them get a structure and to understand what the expectation is, because they are engaging with the world in a very different way. And they are not reinforced, and they don't pick up things by just watching it or the small little reinforcements that the schools give. We have to work in a very specific way to kind of move them through it, and to have them not force them through it, but move them through it, at their own comfort, etc.
So you used it as a tool, essentially, instead of a cure or however else, that's the wrong word, but you know what I mean? Not like a last place you're going to be. This is a tool to help you.
It's a resource for a finite amount of time until a child is able to kind of, again, here's that larger conversation of like if the educational system needs to be far better than it is. But at some point you hope that you could go, oh, okay, I think that kid's ready to enter this really beautiful educational system in this way now that we've created together. There are a couple kids that will need that level of intensity, maybe their whole life.
Okay.
A couple, in a population of, this, but I don't know, that it goes into other conversations. There's just sort of like greed and money and what it's all based on, and tax brackets and how it's paid.
The perks of starting a business.
Screwy thing, that's like, back to sort of what we started with at the beginning a little too, is just like, I just got this sweatshirt that says "People over Profits," and it's if we can remember that, like, what everything that we are trying to do, it would be my hope that we're trying to do it so that people on this planet have a beautiful life, so that every person on this planet is able to sort of feel content, to feel taken care of, to feel that they have enough of their needs met, and enough of the skills taught and opportunities given to them that they can reach that next potential when you're not worried about surviving all the time. And that contributes to a better planet for all of us if we let people get to that place. And so that's the goal in education for me. And in writing these books, it is to sort of constantly presence that idea of, you're okay. And can we build a society that helps people be okay, so that we reap the benefits of each one of us and the gifts that we have to share? So it's a thing I keep my eye on that thing all the time while
it's your North Star.
Like humanity. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I promise this is the last question. I ask every podcast guest this, but if you had a magic wand that could change something in the mental health system or ways people think about themselves, what would you use that for?
I mean, it's a magic wand. So
you can give everyone a unicorn if you want.
Yeah. I think I'm ready. I think I would sort of imbue, and this word doesn't capture it really, but like, I would sort of imbue the whole world with this idea of like, you're enough right now. Like there's nothing you're seeking. That like where you are, you're okay. And I say that with a capital O, a capital K, a beautiful, like.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I have it written on my monitor. What if everything you seek, you already have?
Yeah.
Right. Like yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. If we could embody that. we'd all wake up tomorrow like,
Yeah.
how are you doing? How are you doing?
I love that. Yeah, that'd be a killer gift that everyone would have. Wow. Huh. Jason, I can't thank you enough for doing this with me. How can people get a hold of you? And I'll put links in the description where they can grab these books. They're fantastic. But if people want to follow you or what you're up to, do you have a specific place?
Most of my Facebook and Instagram are all just Jason Gruhl, and Gruhl. And then my website, you can see a little bit more about me, is jasongruhl.com. And yeah, I think just searching for that. The books are available almost anywhere. We always tell people to go to their independent bookstores, and support them. And if that's difficult, Amazon, has all those things too. But it's been, I want another 90 minutes to kind of dive into what you do too, because I've watched many of your podcasts and the videos and things that you did at the beginning. And it's just the question you're in is really inspiring to me. And I think what you're doing is so powerful and so authentic. And when you asked if we could do this, I was just like, I am the lucky guy here to be with you.
I'm definitely, I feel honored you would spend this time with me. I mean, I'd be happy to do one again if you're down for that too. I feel like we only scratched the surface of the autism schools that you were doing, which I wish I got there sooner. I apologize just for that.
No. We clearly have multiple conversations in us, so it's it's good. But thank you for this today.
What a fantastic conversation. I always go into these podcast interviews nervous because I've never met these people most of the time, and this is the first conversation we're having, and we're going deep down rabbit holes. And what I'm finding is everybody is just so kind and calm, and I leave feeling like my bucket is full. And Jason was no different. I know what I'm giving out for Christmas presents to all my nieces and nephews. So, yes, for more on Jason Gruhl, head over to www.jasongruhl.com. That's it, everybody. If you got somebody you think I should talk to, send them my way. I'd love to chat. If you'd like to support what I'm doing, head over to onewholelifemedia.com, grab a shirt, and start spreading some mental health awareness. As always, everybody, life is meant to be experienced, and curiosity will get you there. See you in the next podcast.